All right, good morning, guys. Welcome, there we go. Welcome back to team. I guess I should say Happy New Year. It's now 2016, first team session of the year. Just for your mental preparation, today is week 13 out of 24, so we just passed the halfway mark. Usually we get halfway until Christmas, 2-week break. We now have 12 weeks left, including today, and they're right in the row. There's no breaks between here and the end of the team season, so let's strap it on, get ready to go. 12 Fridays in a row, and we'll finish up the team year. I have, before Christmas, remember right back before Christmas, I told kind of a throwaway, stupid pun joke right at the end. It was the one about chestnuts boasting in an open foyer. Remember that one? Well, somehow that flipped a switch with a few of you guys, and I got a number of emails with that kind of joke attached. So, you may not like that type of joke, but there's a couple here I have to tell. I have to tell because they came from you guys as a response that brightened up my holiday season. So, here we go. There's a couple of them today because they're bad. So I'll give you two of them back to back. Okay, this one, a panda, which is, you gotta like a story starts with panda. A panda walks into a restaurant, sits down and orders a sandwich. He eats the sandwich, pulls out a gun, and shoots the waiter dead. As the panda stands up to go, the manager shouts, "Hey, where are you going? You just shot my waiter and you didn't pay for your sandwich." The panda yells back at the manager, "Hey man, I'm a panda. Look it up." The manager opens the dictionary and sees the following definition for panda: a tree-dwelling marsupial of an Asian origin, characterized by distinct black and white coloring, eats shoots and leaves. If you need to look that up later for yourself, just type in eat shoots and leaves and it'll come right up. Okay, this one actually leads into the topic for today. 2 men contracted to paint a small community church. Being very cheap, they gave a low bid and got the job. So they pinched and scraped to spend the absolute minimum on materials. Then when they were only partway through the job, they determined that they did not, after all, have enough paint to complete the painting of the job of painting the church. Not wishing to spend any more money because it cut into their profits, they decided they'd have to dilute the water-based paint they were using so that it would last longer. They did this a couple more times before they finished, which caused striping on the church as the paint got lighter each time it was thinned. The painters had just about gotten to the top of the steeple when all of a sudden the sky darkened and rain started to pour down. As the paint streamed down the sides of the church, a voice boomed from the heavens, "Repaint, repaint, you thinners, repaint and thin no more." Okay, those are unbelievably stupid, but it's a good way to start the morning. But that last story segues right into our topic for today. We're talking about the legacy of integrity. See the connection there? And I'm going to show you a clip out of Shawshank Redemption, really one of the great movies in recent years. And there are a number of scenes I could use with different topics out of this particular movie. But in this scene, we find out that Warden Norton, which was his name, the warden is not what he seems. He's skimming money through several dishonest schemes. And Andy is actually, unbeknownst to him, becoming an accomplice in keeping the books, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So watch this scene out of Shawshank Redemption.
Contractor in town.
Ed, we're providing.
The rest of us did our best to pitch in when and where we could. By the year Kennedy was shot, Andy had transformed a storage room smelling of rat turds and turpentine into the best prison library in New England, complete with a fine selection of Hank Williams.
Lord, I don't know what to do. All I do is sit inside.
That was also the year Warden Norton instituted his famous Inside Out program. You may remember reading about it. It made all the papers and got his picture in Look magazine.
No free ride, but rather a genuine progressive advance in corrections and rehabilitation. Our inmates, properly supervised, will be put to work outside these walls, performing all manner of public service. These men can learn the value of an honest day's labor while providing a valuable service to the community and at a bare minimum of expense to Mr. and Mrs. John Q. taxpayer.
Of course, Norton failed to mention to the press that bare minimum of expense is a fairly loose term. There are 100 different ways to skim off the top. Men, materials, you name it. And oh my Lord, how the money rolled in.
If this keeps up, you're gonna put me out of business.
Ed.
This pool of slave labor you got, you can underbid any contractor in town.
Ed, we're providing a valuable community service here.
Well, that's fine for the papers, but I've got a family to feed. Sam, we go back a long way. I need this new highway contract. I don't get it, and I go under. That's a fact. Just have some of this fine pie my missus made especially for you. You think about that.
Ed, I wouldn't worry too much about this contract. Seems to me I already got my boys committed elsewhere. You be sure and thank Maisie for this fine pie.
And behind every shady deal, behind every dollar earned, there was Andy, keeping the books.
2 deposits, Maine National and New England First. Night drops as always, sir.
If you've seen the movie, you kind of know how that all comes out at the end. But our theme is, at the end of the day, the legacy of a man's life. And at the end of this movie, Warden Norton's life ends up not so good, because things don't end up well for him, because Andy eventually knows where all the records are, and you know how the end of the movie is. Integrity. Integrity is a powerful thing. It's an incredibly fragile thing. It goes to trustworthiness, to honor, reputation, respect, and at the end of the day, that's really all a man has, is his integrity. I think we saw some of this past week in the Baseball Hall of Fame voting, of all places, and we saw it in the names that were left off the list, that did not get enough votes. Names like Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa, mainly because the voters, Baseball Writers Association, believes that those guys cheated the game. That they used PEDs and therefore cheated the game, and that goes to integrity. Or we can look at what appears to be the tragic story of Bill Cosby, 40 years or more of him being America's favorite dad, the beloved comedian, all that gone now in a mudslide, just a mudslide of accusations. But let's also be honest here. The subject of integrity is a hard one, because there, but for the grace of God, go all of us. Isn't that true? Because no man is perfect. No man is perfect. We all make mistakes. We're all at least a little less than we seem on the outside. But as we begin the topic of integrity, let me say this. Integrity is not the same as perfection. Integrity does not mean sinlessness. It means something a little different than that, and that's what I want to get at today. So let's look at our story. Before we read it, let me give you some background. Most of us know at least the rough outline of the story of David and Goliath. Even people in our culture who don't even know it's in the Bible know roughly the outline of the story. Young shepherd boy kills a great warrior of the Philistines, what's often regarded as the greatest underdog story of all time. If you've heard me talk about it, you know that I don't believe it's so much an underdog story as a story of very shrewd strategy and courage, because I think young David knew exactly how he was going to kill Goliath from the time he saw him the first time in the battlefield, but that's a different story for a different time. But that story of David's victory is key to the story that we look at today, because a man named Saul is the king of Israel at this time, and God had chosen Saul as the first king of the nation of Israel. Now, Saul couldn't figure out how to defeat Goliath. His armies were day after day listening to Goliath defy them and defy the living God. He wasn't willing to go out and fight Saul himself. So when young David showed up and goes out and kills the enemy, two things happened simultaneously. First of all, David became wildly popular because the story spread of what he did. Story of courage and success, victory on the battlefield. And Saul, the king, lost face. He lost face. His reputation was damaged with his army, number one, who now wanted to follow David, and with the entire kingdom as the story spread. So Saul becomes insanely jealous of young David and has twice tried to kill him by the time we pick up the story we're going to look at today. Now, David is hiding in the wilderness with a few of his loyal friends, while Saul's army, some 3,000 of them, are trying to hunt David down to eliminate him as a threat, as a rival to the throne of Israel. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. Let's pick up the story. 1 Samuel 24, verse 13 verses. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. Now, let me jump in here. This is an area west of the Dead Sea, if you know anything about the topography of Israel. It's mountainous and rugged. We had a chance to visit there back when we were in the Holy Land last spring. Incredibly rugged region. Nothing grows there. Craggy mountains. It's really a desert mountainous region. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Sometimes this is translated as the springs of the wild goats. The region is very arid, but there are some springs bubbling up in this region, so that's where the wild animals, the goats and stuff, would gather for water. Sometimes shepherds would bring their flocks there. David had formerly been a shepherd, so he knew this area well, knew the caves that he could hide in. So he came to the sheep pens. This is Saul now. Came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. When you got to go, even when you're a king. David and his men were far back in the cave, so they were hiding in the same cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you." Okay, now this is a great story. It's one of these weird Old Testament stories that's just, it's almost funny to read, but there's a powerful lesson here. First of all, this is one of the stories in the Bible that, to me, is evidence of the genuineness of the biblical record. It's full of strange little details, geographical accuracies, and little details that just make it smell like a genuine story. I mean, this is not the kind of story you would fabricate if you were going to make up stories about the greatest king in Israel's history, which was David. So it just reeks of genuineness and authenticity. I think it's also a story for us today about integrity, at least at this point in young David's life. Let's begin with a kind of a beginning definition of integrity. Integrity is being honest and having strong moral principles. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's what it says. Honesty and strong moral principles. It also is the state of being whole or undivided. When something has integrity, it hasn't been split apart, it hasn't been separated, it hasn't been divided, it's whole. We'll come back to both of those definitions. Now again, integrity is not, in my opinion, perfection, but it does imply some things. The first thing it implies is doing the right thing when no one is looking. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. We've all seen the almost unimaginable escalation of salaries, particularly for professional athletes, and particularly for baseball, if you pay any attention. David Price, pitcher that the Cubs tried to get, they didn't get him. He signed with the Boston Red Sox. He signed a contract for $30 million a season, which for a starting pitcher is about $1 million a game. And at 100 pitches a game, it's $10,000 per pitch next year, when you think about it that way. But a couple of years ago, there was a unique story about a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants named Jeremy Affeldt. There was a clerical error. The club made a clerical error in arranging his contract, which gave him $500,000 more than the amount that he and his agent had negotiated for. A mistake on the club's part, nothing illegal about it. He would have received $500,000 more than he thought he had negotiated. He voluntarily gave the money back to the club. When he was asked why he did that, when it wasn't illegal for him to do it, he said this: "I can't take that money. I won't sleep well at night knowing that I took money, because every time I open my paycheck, I'll know it's not right." Now, that's integrity. Here, David has the opportunity to get revenge. Saul has tried to kill him twice and advance his career all at the same time. No one is going to see what happens. They're in a cave. David knows he's popular with the people. They want him to be king. He knows his popularity. He's heard what people say. He knows Saul's trying to kill him. He knows that Saul is no longer fit really to be a king because he's losing his marbles. He's losing his mind. Saul comes into the cave to relieve himself and is totally vulnerable. I mean, is there any more vulnerable position to be in than that position? I think not. All David has to do is either kill Saul himself or give his guys, give his boys permission to do it. Just give them the word. They're ready to kill Saul because they want David to be king. Just like that, career advancement, enemy is gone. No one will ever know. They're inside the cave. Notice, even David's friends suggest this might be God's will for him. It might be what God has prepared. They say, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So what's David going to do? The Bible says David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now, if you're asking me, if you're like me, you ask yourself, how does that happen? I mean, Saul's taking care of business and is concentrating, but wouldn't he notice? Well, here's the deal. Saul's not wearing his robe. In those days, he would have removed his robe prior to entering or at some other place in the cave because he wouldn't want his robe to be made unclean according to Jewish customs, kind of like hanging your coat up out in the hallway before you go into the men's room. A bigger question is, why would David do this? We don't exactly know. Maybe he was going to go kill him and then lost his nerve or changed his mind. Maybe he just wanted to take a little piece of the robe to be able to show Saul, as he does later, that he could have killed him and chose not to. But look at how David responds even after doing this. Afterward, David is conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. David doesn't kill Saul. He only slices a small portion of his robe, but he's still conscience-stricken, the Bible says, for having cut his robe. Why? Because it's a disrespectful thing to do to God's anointed one. Here we see, I think, how David's moral compass works at this point in his life. He knows intuitively right from wrong. Killing Saul while he's in the can feels wrong to him. Insulting the king by cutting off a portion of his robe feels wrong to him. Now, where does that sense of right and wrong come from David? Where does his moral compass come from? It comes from God. Because God here, God's will is David's true north. It's the direction of David's compass. And by the way, there's a strong philosophical argument for the existence of God through the innate sense of right and wrong that almost every human being has. Almost every one of us has something that we regard to be immoral or wrong, almost without thinking about it. It might be child abuse, or it might be torture, or it might be stealing. Particularly if someone steals your stuff, you feel wronged, you feel injustice. That's not right. But here's the argument. If there is no God, if there is no ultimate purpose or ultimate destiny to human life, if we're all just the result of random forces of evolution, then our brains are also just the result of random molecules coming together, and our thoughts themselves are random processes. Therefore, moral convictions make no sense. They're meaningless. It's always interesting to me to see people who claim not to believe in a personal God take up causes like animal cruelty with great passion, not realizing that passion comes to them because they're created in the image of a God who creates right from wrong, who establishes right from wrong. That's a side note for a different time. But David believed that God had chosen and anointed Saul. And until God unchose him, Saul was his king. That's what David's true north was. He believed he was to respect God's choice and God's timing, and that he would wait. That's integrity. David chose to do the right thing, even though he had the opportunity to get away with the wrong thing. Secondly, integrity is refusing to do the right thing in the wrong way. Let me try to explain what I mean there. For several years, my brother-in-law, Jeff Helton, served as a executive pastor at a very large church near Nashville, Tennessee. 4,000 or 5,000 people, 3 campuses. He was hired by the senior pastor, who was also the founding pastor of this church. And he wanted my brother-in-law to run the entire staff. There was a bunch of stuff to clean up in the organization, budget-wise, staffing-wise. He had to let some people go, had to clean some stuff up, which he did. But the final problem he had to deal with turned out to be the senior pastor himself. The guy had some power issues, some anger and rage issues, abused his staff verbally, and some stuff like that. But one Sunday before, Jeff was listening to the guy preach, and the pastor began a sermon with a joke, kind of like I begin here. And the joke just didn't sound like something that he had ever heard. Didn't sound like the pastor. It sounded like that's an interesting joke. Maybe it was good or whatever. And it just something rang a little weird to him. So he took out his phone right at church, and he typed in the punchline of the joke, and it popped up in a sermon on a sermon website, and he started reading through, and the guy was delivering a sermon word for word that he got off the internet. He was plagiarizing somebody else's sermon, word for word, point for point, and my brother-in-law discovered it accidentally, and this was his boss, his senior pastor. So that was a lack of integrity. Now, this is a tricky issue for pastors. We all read all kinds of stuff. When I prepare, I read all kinds of stuff. You can get any sermon anytime from any great preacher in America right now on the internet. You can find any of that stuff. Bill Hybels, Billy Graham, you name it, you can find it. But to use a guy's message word for word without attribution, that's a no-no. It's something you shouldn't do. And we actually have a set of standards here for all our speakers here. Here's what plagiarism is in preaching. Here's what you need to be careful of. Here's when you attribute, those kinds of things. This guy gave a good sermon. It was a good sermon, but he did it the wrong way. David knows that Saul's days as king are numbered. He knows Saul's on his way out. David knows God has gifted him, David, with many, many gifts. He knows he's being prepared to be king. He knows that Samuel, the prophet, early in his life had anointed him sort of in a secret ceremony. He knows he's going to be the next king. So now he has a perfect opportunity to take a huge career step that's probably going to be good for the whole nation, to get this guy out of the throne. All he has to do is let his men take care of business. In a sense, he has a chance to do the right thing, become king in the wrong way, by killing Saul himself. But he refuses to do it. He doesn't do the right thing the wrong way. He doesn't allow the end to justify the means. He trusts God to take care of things his way and his timing. In other words, no shortcuts. He refuses to take a shortcut. I've said it before, but almost all sin, I think, what the Bible calls sin, can be seen as taking a shortcut. For example, God has given us as human beings the gift of sexual intimacy. It's a great gift. I think it's a great gift. You think it's a great gift. But he gave us then boundaries within which we are to experience that intimacy, how it works best. One man joined to one woman for life. It's called marriage. When we disregard God's boundaries in any way, when we take shortcuts, what we end up doing is destroying the gift itself. The pastor took a shortcut to his sermon, didn't give credit where it was due. In business, it might be implying that you can deliver something, a product, an end result, a deliverable, at a certain time when you know you can't, but you do it just to get the deal done. So getting the deal done is a good thing. The way you got it done is not the right way. It might be allowing your boss to give you a bonus for something you know one of your underlings actually accomplished, but you allow him to give you the bonus because he doesn't know any better. Integrity is refusing to do the right thing, a good thing, in the wrong way. It's refusing to take shortcuts. Thirdly, integrity is being the same person all the time. The same person all the time. In a few weeks, we'll have the Super Bowl. Don't know who's going to play in it. Hope it's not the Packers, but that's just me. Super Bowl's coming up. And you remember a couple of years ago, I don't know how long it was ago now, but the story broke that on the night before the Super Bowl, a player was arrested for soliciting a prostitute. Remember that story? I think it was with the Atlanta Falcons, something like that. And there were several things about the story that got national attention. First of all, it was a juicy story because of the alleged situation. Second of all, it was the night before the game, and what was he doing? And third, the player involved happened to be an outspoken Christian athlete who just that week had spoken at a large prayer breakfast and received an award like Man of the Year or Father of the Year or something like that. So the media just ate up that side of the story, right? It was just too easy. Hypocrite, phony, all that stuff was out there. And it was sad. The player had damaged his own reputation almost beyond repair. I don't know that he ever made it back into the NFL. I don't know if he ever recovered from that. I don't know. He damaged the reputation of the gospel, of Christ himself. But I want to make a distinction here. Like I said, no one is perfect. The Bible is very clear. We're all sinners. We all fail. We all fall short. So integrity doesn't mean that we're perfect or sinless. It means, though, that we are honest about who we are. Even when we mess up, we're honest enough to do the right thing. We're humble enough to admit when we fail. We don't pretend to be something that we're not. We seek to be the same person wherever we are, whether it's the Friday night before the game or it's the Saturday of the game, where it's Saturday night at home or Sunday morning at church. We seek to be the same person everywhere we are. Honesty and with humility, whether that's work, home, church, neighborhood. David's life is a very interesting study in integrity. Early in his life, he demonstrates tremendous integrity in this story and several others. God has blessed him through that integrity. Later in his life, he makes decisions that lack integrity and bring great pain on himself and his family. And he struggles at the end of his life to rebuild the integrity that he's lost. So as men, we want to build a legacy of integrity. Not perfection, but integrity. And integrity is built on the values of honoring God, honoring God's truth with honesty, humility, and transparency. And it's built one decision at a time. Legacy of integrity. Here's what I want you to talk about on the table. Just two questions. First, was personal integrity taught and modeled in your home growing up? What I mean there is, can you think of examples when your mom or dad or someone, maybe a coach or something, gave you a key personal lesson in integrity? Maybe it was about your lunch money at school, or maybe it was about something else, but was integrity taught and modeled as you grew up? Secondly, in what area of your life has integrity been challenged the most? At work, are you put into situations consistently where you're challenged in integrity at work, or maybe in your marriage, maybe with your friends, or some other area of your life? So how was it modeled growing up? Can you think of an example? And then where have you been most challenged with personal integrity? Get your coffee, get your donuts. I'll wrap you up, or find me for prayer requests. We'll wrap you up right before 7 o'clock.